sermon series today on idols, and these are the things that kind of creep into our lives and become objects of worship. And most of these things aren't just evil things, they're usually some kind of good to them. The problem is we elevate them beyond the place where they should really be, and we turn them into gods. And when we turn them into gods, C.S. Lewis said, we turn them into demons, and they become idols in our lives, and they become an object that causes our downfall. And so we're wrapping that up today with the idol of information. And so information or knowledge is something that we really, in our modern culture, esteem above almost anything else. We live in an information age. We live in an age where almost everything is available at our fingertips. The problem is that in our modern age, there's so much information out there that it becomes hard to find exactly the piece of information you need. But if you can do it, then there is great power at your fingertips. And in fact, many large companies have become very rich by helping us sort through the vast quantities of information and find just that thing we're looking for. You know, you don't want to watch just any cat video. There's a specific one that you're looking for, and so you need to find just that one. In 1 Corinthians chapter 8, we have a situation. 1 Corinthians chapter 8 is about the idea of food sacrificed to idols. And so in the ancient world, if you lived in most of the Roman Empire and you were a Christian, the meat that was sold at the market, much of it would have come from a local temple to some god. And there was a lot of different gods that were worshipped. And so what would happen is that there was a constant need for sacrifices, and so meat that was going to go to the market and be sold would be slaughtered at the temple, and that would then be blessed and would be part of some pagan ceremony, and then it would be diverted to the temple where it was sold. And so a problem cropped up in the early churches. Do I need to just skip going to the market and buying meat for my family altogether because I don't know whether this meat has been sacrificed to an idol or not? And it was causing some problems within the early Christian community. And 1 Corinthians chapter 8 is all about this issue and how the church should respond to it. Now, if that's something that interests you, I encourage you to read all of 1 Corinthians chapter 8. Our primary concern for this sermon, however, is just the first few verses here, an issue that comes up as a part of this larger issue of food sacrifice to idols. Now, it starts, 1 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 1 says, "Now concerning food offered to idols, we know that all of us possess knowledge." Now, I don't know which version that you might be reading out of on your phone or in a physical Bible, but in the ESV that I was looking at, it's all of us possess knowledge. That is in quotes. And what's happening is there's an argument being made here. And so that argument presupposes some ideas or some issues here that might not quite be true. We're presupposing some things. We're taking some things for granted here. We're allowing somebody else's argument to be brought in here and being supposed as if it's true. So that's why these are in quotes, because that's what's happening in the passages. Now, concerning food offered to idols, we all know that all of us possess knowledge. This knowledge, again in quotes, puffs up, but love builds up. If anyone imagines that he knows something, he does not yet know as he ought to know. But if anyone loves God, he is known by God. So what's happening here is Paul is taking, there's a bit of a argument going on within the church. And in this argument, what's happening is people are saying, well, I know certain things, and so I'm going to go out and I'm going to act on that knowledge. And what Paul is doing here is he's dealing with this idea that you know certain things. And the idea behind this is that your knowledge is causing you to be prideful. You aren't thinking of certain things the way that you should be thinking of them because in your mind, the possession of this knowledge becomes the God of your actions.
Because you have this piece of information now, you know that you can act a certain way. And what he's saying here is that that's actually not the way that this works. And notice that he uses knowledge here a few times. We know, first of all, that all of us possess knowledge, so we know that we all possess knowledge. This knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. If anyone imagines that he knows something, but does not yet know as he if anyone imagines that he knows something, he does not yet know as he ought to know. But notice what he does in verse 3. But if anyone loves God, he is known by God. What Paul is doing here is he's drawing some distinctions. And he's drawing some distinctions that are relevant to us as modern people. Because just like these early Christians think, well, I know some things, and because I know those things, I can act in a certain way. They're elevating knowledge above where it should be. In relationship to love, what Paul is saying here is like, look, it's great that you know these things. And what is the knowledge he's talking about? Well, what happens is that some people are sophisticated and they know that these idols that are being worshipped are nothing. These idols are nothing. And because of that, I'm going to act like this is nothing. Well, the problem is that you have other believers who maybe worship that idol for a long time and now have become Christians. And to them, this you can't just get over a lifetime of behavior in 1 second. And so they're freaked out by this. And what's happening is there's conflict and people are being led into things that aren't good because somebody says, well, I know it's nothing. Well, indeed, it is nothing. But if you think that knowledge then is the thing that determines your behavior, then you don't really know as you think you should know. What Paul's saying here is that there's something beyond your knowledge of an idol being nothing, and that something that's beyond that knowledge is the love that you have for your brother. How is your behavior affecting your brother? You see, knowledge is being put in a place that it shouldn't occupy. It's being elevated. It's being lifted up. And now it's being lifted up above the love of your brother. So if anyone imagines that he knows something, he does not know as he ought to know. What you should know is that love for your brother supersedes your knowledge that an idol is nothing. But if anyone loves God, he is known by God. That's what we should want to, that's the kind of knowledge that we should be after, being united to God. Now, obviously for us, the elevation of knowledge or the elevation of information to being a God does not take place in the context of food sacrificed to idols. So what context does it take place in? Well, we're going to talk about 3 things today. We're going to talk about the information age. We're going to talk about exploration and experience. And we're going to talk about the joy of true knowledge. So the idea here is that we live in this information age and everything needs to be filtered through that. The second thing is in exploration and experience, we're going to talk about the fact that information and knowledge are actually 2 different things. And then finally, we're going to talk about what true knowledge is and the joy that's found in that. There is a difference between information and knowledge. True knowledge is going to bring about joy. So number 1, the information age. We talked about this earlier, that we live in this age where there's all kinds of ways for us to access knowledge, and it gives us power. That's the big thing for us. It's not food sacrificed to idols. It's the power that information gives us. The thing that's crazy is you have all kinds of companies doing all kinds of research all the time. And if you, let's say you own a company and you want to know before you go through manufacturing a new product whether it's going to be successful or not, you can access all kinds of information about what people want. There's all kinds of focus groups, study groups that will tell you whether or not people are going to like your new product. But even if that's the case, even if people don't like your product, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't make it, because there's another whole group of people that have information on how to make people like your product. That's a whole other field of knowledge. How can we make people think that they need your product? Because a lot of people will say, you don't know what you need until you see it. Well, how do we make sure that when you see it, you realize that you needed this thing? And so with the right kind of knowledge, we come to believe in our world today is that with the right kind of knowledge, we can have almost unlimited power. We also think that we need information on people. Why? Because that's just a tool for getting what you want. How many of you guys, when you were a college student, you looked at the course catalog and you started talking to friends or people. Now it's actually easier than it was when I was younger, because now you can get on different websites and you can look up information about different classes and the teachers that teach them. And you say to yourself, which is the easiest class, right? I need information on this professor. Is this the easiest class? And the thing is that a lot of times what we do is we don't say, well, which is the class that's the most rigorous? Which is the class that's going to teach me the most? We say, which is the one where I'm going to get the best grade with the least amount of effort? But we do this in a lot of other areas as well. You know, which boss do I want to work for? Not the one that's going to make me the best employee, but the one that's going to be the least demanding. Which, you know what I'm saying? The knowledge is the power to get the life that we want. And along with this information age and information being at the heart of everything, we now trust in experts to plan out the course of our life. You want to know what to eat? There's all kinds of experts to tell you. And who doesn't want to know what to eat? You don't want to know what supplements to take so that you can live forever? Well, there's a group of experts that will tell you that. You want to avoid this illness or that illness? Well, there's a group of experts. You want to know how to plan your financial future? There's a group of experts. And all of this will get us the life that we want. We trust in these experts. And in fact, I've heard more than a few times this phrase, and you might have heard this as well. Have you ever heard this coming from somebody who's not a Christian? And they will say to you, they say, you have faith and I have facts. Have you ever heard somebody say that? I've heard that many times. You have faith and I have facts. And it's said with kind of, you know, they're sad for you, really. They are. They're sad for you. You have faith. That's neat. It's cute. It's quaint. But it's kind of sad because I have facts. Well, the problem is that in our information age, we've come to believe an informational definition of the idea of faith. You see, along with this problem of just having information become the god of our current culture, information has come to be the root of the definitions of words that it really shouldn't be. Faith is not primarily information-oriented. You see, what we've done is we've taken the idea of faith and we've reduced it to the mental assent to a certain list of ideas or facts. A mental assent that's not then backed up by enough evidence to make it certain. So we believe that faith means having certainty to mentally assent to agree with a certain list of propositions that are not backed up by as much information or evidence as it should. And so that's what the person who says that is, they're saying, it's sad that you have to mentally assent to these things for which there's not enough evidence, because what I do in my life is I only mentally assent to things that have adequate evidence. That's what people mean today. And they say that sincerely, and they are sincerely sad for you. And given their worldview, it makes sense that they would be sad for you, and you shouldn't take it as an insult, because normally it's not meant that way. But the issue is something completely different than that. When the Bible talks about faith, it's not talking about mental assent to a certain set of propositions or principles for which there is not enough evidence. What the Bible is talking about is confidence. Faith does not equal mental assent to very thinly sourced ideas. It's about living confidently. And because of that, the information age becomes incompatible with really a life of faith. And I don't mean that you can't live a life of faith in an information age. I mean, putting information as your God cannot work with the life of faith. Now, our whole religion has become infested with this idea of information. And one of the ways that you can see that is that as Christians, we've become much more concerned with Bible study than we have with obedience. And when I say that, I don't mean that you shouldn't study the Bible. I believe that you should. But if you Study the Bible over and over again and spend hours and hours learning all the ins and outs. You can learn all the Greek, you can learn all the Hebrew, you can do all that kind of stuff, but you never put it into practice, then it hasn't done you any good at all. But it's a very modern way of approaching it. I was reading a story about a pastor it was actually a sermon, I think, that I was reading, not a story. In this sermon was a story about a prisoner who was locked up for 20 or 30 years, a long time. And in that time, he only was given one book to read, and that was the Bible. And when he finally passed away in prison and they, ushered his corpse out of the cell, what they found was scratched in the walls a number of fascinating facts about the Bible. And he had in that written, what the very middle word of the middle sentence was of the Bible. And he had all these, how many times this word was used, how many times that word was used. All this kind of stuff was all scratched into the wall. And so he'd obviously been bored, not having anything to do, and studied the Bible many, many, many times over. And yet all he bothered to scratch in the wall was nothing about his relationship to the God that's described in the Bible, but only certain facts about the book itself. He had lots of information, but there was no evidence of any faith. And in fact, sometimes the Bible to us as Christians in the modern age, because we take on more of this God of information than we would like to believe, what our faith can become is just another way to do the same thing. You see, we use information to get the life that we want. And sometimes what happens is we go out in the world and we try to find or try to get the life that we want out there in the way that the world pursues it. And when that doesn't work, Christianity just becomes another way of pursuing that life that we want. It becomes another avenue of information to pursue that. And we tell people that they should try Christ because He will work for you. Have you guys ever seen something like that? I was reading about this just the other day. Somebody was saying that they met somebody and it was at a coffee shop, didn't know them, and this person was down and out, and they were saying, hey, try Christ. He'll work for you. Like you've tried other things that haven't worked in your life, but try Christ because He will. Now, it could be that they meant something completely in regards to faith in that statement, but my guess is that it had more to do with He's the way to get what you want. We also have this strange thing in our world. I was watching something recently. It was a person that was involved in van life, and they were talking about all the great things about van life. You guys want to know what I'm talking about? This trend called van life. And in this trend, they were talking about how they lived alone and they were in this van. And the great thing was they could be independent. And they were touting the fact that they could go wherever they wanted to go and stay for as long as they wanted and see whatever they wanted to see and get up whenever they wanted to get up and go to bed whenever they wanted to go to bed and drive for as long as they wanted to and stop for as long as they wanted to because it was just them and their dog. And then there was another video about all the things about van life that were not so great, and the first one was loneliness. We have this desire to be strong and independent, and we find that information helps us in this. That we can do whatever we want to do. And information is vital and key for doing whatever it is that we want to do. The problem is that information is not so good at other things. In James chapter 4, verse 13 through 16, it says, Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go into such and such a town and spend a year there and trade and make a profit. Yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. Now, that's a strange passage for a modern reader, and because we do this all the time. We say, I'm going to go do this, I'm going to go do that. We have our lives all planned out, and we do that based on the information that this is going to give us what we want. But what James is saying here is you're missing something fundamental, something really important, and that is that your life is not independent. Your life is connected to God. In fact, you are a completely dependent being on God. And the idea that information will allow you to be separate and independent from God is at the heart of the idol of information or knowledge. And if you doubt that, just go back to the original story of sin in the garden. Remember that Adam and Eve, they see the tree. Remember the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And Satan says, if you eat from this tree, you will be like God. And then it says that when they looked at it and they saw that the tree was pleasing to the eye and useful for the gaining of wisdom or knowledge, that they ate from it. What did they do? They believed that the tree would give them knowledge, and that knowledge would make them independent from God, that they could be their own gods. And that's still at the heart of the idol of information. The truth is that your life always entails connection with God. You are a completely dependent being on Him. You can no more have a life of independence from God than you could have a life independent from God. So what does this inescapable connection consist of? Well, that's where we need point number two, exploration and experience. Now, here's something that's really important for us to understand. In Luke chapter 8, verse 13, it's talking about spreading the seed. And it says, and the ones on the rock are those who, when they hear the word, they receive it with joy, but they have no root. They believe for a little while, and in a time of testing will fall away. Now that's an interesting statement, right? So remember the parable of the sower, and he's sowing the seeds. It's the parable of the different kinds of soil, and there's different types of soil that the seed or the word falls on. This word, it's a piece of information, right? And the problem is that because it's just a piece of information, you can give mental assent to it. It says that these people, what do? It says when they hear the word, when they get that piece of information, they receive it with joy, but they have no root. They believe for a while, and in time of testing, they fall away. What's happened is that word of God is just a piece of information to them, and they're all excited about it. But there's something else that's necessary to them that they don't get. And so when there's a time of testing, when things get difficult, they just fall away. And what's very fascinating is when you look through Scripture, it's incredibly messy, and this messiness is part of the overall story. It's integral to it. It's not just ancillary. Like the story is messy. Like people are always goofing up. People are always causing problems. There's always all kinds of drama going on, right? There's plagues, and there's wars, and there's famines, and there's pestilence, and there's all kinds of things. And then there's sin and mistakes and backstabbing and lies, and all of this stuff is going on in Scripture. It's a sordid tale, and it's not what we would expect in the Bible. If you watch the Hallmark Channel or someplace like that, or read Reader's Digest, you get this view of the Bible as everything's all, good. And it's the most sordid tale you can possibly believe. And we think that if we just believe in God, if we just take this piece of information that God exists, if we believe in God, that everything in their life will be just fine and you'll get what you want. People believe that. Maybe that sounds strange to you, but if you've been a Christian for a long time and you're used to the idea of faith as being in confidence, something deeper than just mental assent to a set of facts or a set of principles, if you've grown up knowing that that's not the way that it works, it might surprise you to know that out there in the world, there's all kinds of people who believe that if they just believe in God, that everything in their life will turn out fine. That He's just a piece of information that's necessary to get the life that they want. And once they have that piece of information and they give their mental assent to it, well, everything turns out well. It's a Hallmark movie type of faith, and it's incredibly common now. But in the Bible, that's not the way that it works. When you have an encounter with God, if you're going to have faith, buckle up. That's the way it works in the Bible. If you in the Bible, if you say, I have faith in God, and you mean something more than mental assent to the idea that God exists, if you really have confidence in God, buckle up. Your life is about to get complicated. Your life is about to get messy. Your life is about to get serious. All of a sudden, things are going to go crazy and haywire for you, and you better hold on because it's going to be a crazy ride. I mean, just look at all the people in the Bible. Look at Moses. Look at Abraham. Look at everybody. You know, people are constantly getting thrown into lions' dens. Why? Because they had faith. They're getting thrown into fiery furnaces. Why? Because they had faith. You know, they didn't say, oh, I believe in God, and then they ended up in there. No, there's something different about faith. It's not the same thing as having a piece of information. In fact, there's all kinds of strange things that go on in the Old Testament, and when people have faith, they're called on to experience all kinds of trials and tribulations. And the question is, well, why is that? And the reason is because if you go up to a toddler, there's a 50-50 chance that he's going to punch you. I'll explain how these two things connect, I hope. But the truth is, if you walk up to a toddler, there's like a 50-50 chance that he's just going to haul off and punch you. Have you guys noticed this? Yeah? Have you ever been punched by a toddler? How many of you guys have been punched? Let's just do an informal survey here. How many of you have been punched by a toddler? Raise your hand. Okay, quite a few of you. Yeah. Why? And sometimes, have you ever had a smiling toddler punch you? I have. I've actually, one of Tyler's favorite things to do when he was very, very young was to get really happy and laugh and smile at me and put his head right up next to mine, maybe a few inches away, and in the middle of his smile, headbutt me right in the nose. Why do toddlers do that? Well, how else are you going to find out what things are like? What do toddlers do? They go out in the world and they test the world. Toddlers aren't interested in information. You know, the thing is that you take a toddler and you sit him down and you say, we're going to learn right now. Try it. Now, some of you have been involved in daycare, right? If you've been involved in daycare or teaching young children, does this work well? Let's sit down, let's all be still, let's fold our hands, and let's learn about the world. No, to a toddler, that's just information. They don't care about that. They're going to learn about the world in a different way. They're going to put the world to the test. And so a toddler will smile at you and punch you. Why? Because he wants to see what happens. How else is he going to know? He's going to poke you, and he's going to prod you, and he's going to wake you up in the middle of the night, and he's going to punch you, and he's going to smile at you and headbutt you because he wants to see what happens. He needs to know about the world, and the way that you learn about the world is you put it to the test. Toddlers do this all the time. They taste, they slobber on, they poke, they prod, they try. Because exploration is the key to a child's learning. And that's what they want to do. And they don't want to sit at a table and hear facts about something. They want to go out there and they want to put it to the test. Now, it's interesting. There was a guy named Henry Morton Stanley. I've talked about him a long time ago. Henry Morton Stanley was a guy who had a crazy bad childhood. Crazy bad. His father and mother, I don't think that they were married, and at the time that he was born, in the 1800s, that wasn't a recipe for success socially, if you know what I'm talking about. And his dad took off, and I think he was a drunk, and his mom might have been a prostitute, and so she gave him to her father to take care of. So he was taken care of by his grandfather, who then died when he was aged 5. And so as a 5-year-old, he went off to live to another relative, and then he has vivid memories. I don't know how old he was, but he has vivid memories of that relative taking him and dropping him off at the poorhouse and never seeing him again. The poorhouse was it was also the workhouse. It was a place where poor people went, and they would provide you food and shelter, but in return, you had to work hard to earn that. It wasn't easy to earn money for food and shelter in those days. And so he has this vivid memory of this person dropping him off and walking out the door. And he has this vivid childhood memory of watching this person walk away and experiencing total and complete aloneness. These people don't care for you, they don't know you, and you're just there and you're abandoned forever. By age 11, he was experimenting with his will. He blamed for the situation in his life a lack of will and a lack of willpower in his parents and in the relatives who dropped him off. And, he could look around and see a lot of people who lacked a lot of willpower. And so he decided to start testing the limits of his will and testing how his will might be increased. And so he would go without food. 1 out of every 3 meals he would give a portion of to somebody else. And so he didn't get a lot of food to begin with, but he thought, I need to have willpower over my appetite. And that's how he just went through life. I will test myself, and I will put myself to the test, and I will see the limits of what I'm capable of. Well, he ended up taking on the name of Henry Morton Stanley, even though that wasn't his name, to get himself away from his past. And then he went out to see what he could make of himself in the world. And he made of himself one of the most prolific and well-regarded explorers of the African continent of his time. And at one point, he was taking and exploring Africa, and he had with him a bunch of people who were there to help in the expedition. And everything went wrong. The natives attacked them and killed them. Disease broke out. Food was not able to be found. And it was a disaster. This expedition was just a disaster. And 2/3 of the people who went into Africa with him on his expedition did not return. 2/3. And yet he developed the nickname of the Rock Crusher, because his will was just something that could not be overpowered. You see, he had gone out into the world and he had put himself to the test, and he had explored the world and he had explored what he was made out of. And he found out that the limits were far beyond what he thought they were. That's what really the Old Testament is like. The Old Testament is not like developing some ideas. It's about finding the limits of the covenant that God has. And that's why it looks so messy. Because you have to poke and you have to prod and you have to put to the test in this area, in this area, in this area. What if I do this? What if I do that? What if I go over here? What happens over there? Is God to be found there? Can salvation be found even down there? What if you go to the darkest depths? What if you go down to the bottomless pit? What if you go down to the deepest part of the world possible? What if you find yourself in the worst place you could possibly ever find yourself? Is God there? Does His covenant still stand there? You see, all these people in the Bible, they're like explorers who go out and they go farther and farther, and they map out the limits of the covenant with God. And what they find is absolutely stunning. You see, faith is about that kind of confidence, not about gaining a piece of information. In Romans chapter 8, verse 35 through 39, it says, "Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation or distress or persecution or famine or nakedness or danger or sword? As it is written, for your sake we are being killed all day long. We are regarded as sheep to be slaughtered. No, in all these things we are more than conquerors through Him who loved us." How do they know that? How do they know that the love of Christ is to be found in all these places? How do they know? How do they know that if you're facing tribulation, or you're facing distress, or you're facing persecution, or famine, or nakedness, or danger, or sword, how do they know that Christ's love is to be found there? Because they've been there. Verse 38 continues, "For I am sure that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor rulers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God in Jesus Christ." We were talking this morning about Revelation and about this book because there's this fundamental aspect of God's character that is hesed. It's his loving kindness. But it's really more than loving kindness because it actually kind of means something like covenantal faithfulness. And the question is that what are the boundaries of that? How far is God willing to go to show his loving kindness to us, to show his love for us, to redeem us and to be unified with us? How far will God go? Well, somebody had to go there. Somebody had to go there. The thing that's interesting is that when you go there, that's when you develop confidence. Until you go there, it's really only a theory, but if you've gone there, then it's something else. So there's all these billionaires now that are developing rockets. Have you noticed this? Like if you're a billionaire and you're not developing a rocket, you're just, I don't know, you're not a real billionaire, I guess. You're not part of the cool kids club. But the thing is that they're all developing it. And one of the things that I appreciated, although I don't appreciate everything about all the billionaires who are going up, I appreciate the fact that some of them are willing to go up in their own ships. Because you'd kind of be a little suspicious if they weren't, right? Like if some billionaire says, I've developed this rocket and you can pay me all kinds of money to go up in it, and he hasn't gone on it himself, you kind of wonder. But that's the nature of faith, isn't it? Faith requires exploration. Faith requires saying to yourself, in the midst of this thing that I'm going through, can God be found here? Is the love of God to be found in this thing I'm going? And in order to do that, you actually have to search for him in that place. And we get into all kinds of places that are really difficult in our lives. We get into places where our health is having problems. We get into places where we lose somebody. We get into all kinds of places. And the thing is, when you're in that place, you need more than a piece of information that's not supported by any evidence. You need to actually look for, is God found here? The Bible says if we seek him, we'll find him, because he is not far from any one of us. Thirdly and lastly, we need to look at the joy of true knowledge. In the Bible, see, the reason that I called this the idol of information and not the idol of knowledge is because we use knowledge in a way now to mean knowing a piece of information. But in the biblical sense, to know meant something else. You might remember that in the Bible it says Adam knew Eve and she conceived a son. And, when you were a kid, you didn't know what that meant, and that's probably why they wrote it that way. And as you were an adult, you go, well, why did they write it that way? Well, because the idea of knowledge is something different in the Bible. In Psalm chapter 34, verse 8, it says, "Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the man who takes refuge in him." The idea of knowledge in the Bible is experiential. It's not a piece of information. It's have you experienced it. When you say, I know that God loves me, you're saying, I've experienced the love of God. When you say, I know that God's grace extends to this or to that, or the love of God, I can't be separated from it if you're in this place or that place. That means you know that. You've experienced that there. You don't gather information about it. You don't find out its relevant statistics. Why? Because these things don't lead to joy. Think about it. Jeff Bezos or any one of the other billionaires who's building spaceships, he can say, oh, I know what it's made out of. I know how much the rocket weighs. I know how much it, how fast it accelerates. I know how much it costs me to send it up. I know how much I spent building it. He can tell you all these relevant facts, but that's not knowledge from the biblical sense. He doesn't have knowledge in the biblical sense until he gets on the rocket and rides it. But you see, the thing is that he doesn't really get to experience joy until he gets on it and rides it. And that's why biblical knowledge actually leads to joy, where information never does. You see, we gather information about things to control them, but biblical knowledge is different. When we have biblical knowledge, we've experienced something. We've put our trust in it. We've experienced what it's like. Imagine building a great race car, never being able to ride in it, or a great airplane, never being able to ride in it, or building a great bridge and never crossing it. The thing is that you miss out on all the joy of the experience. Imagine our toddler who wants to punch you, learning all kinds of facts about his father, but never having his father throw him up in the air and experience the trust and the joy that comes from trust. You see, God wants us to experience the joy of true knowledge. He wants us to be united to Him. He wants us to put our trust in Him and to take the ride with Him. So how do we apply this? Well, first of all, meditate on His love for you. And it's not something that's a fact about God or this or that. It's a relationship with God. Meditate on that. In belonging to Him through the covenant, ask yourself, what does it mean to be His? Like if you were God's, what kind of care and concern does that entail? If you say God has a car or God has a set of golf clubs, like what does that mean? What does it mean for God to have you? If you belong to God, what kind of care and concern is implied by that? And be transformed. What can you do to experience the trust and love of God this week? How can you obey Him? How can you take the ride with Him? I encourage you to look on our website and on our Facebook page for the additional materials that we make available to you each week so that you can take that ride with Him. Don't miss out on the love of God.
Thanks for joining our worship service today. Please follow us on our Facebook page, where you can let us know about any needs or prayer requests you may have and keep up with the latest church news and events. You can also check out our past lessons and videos by visiting our YouTube channel. At First Christian, we strive to be the presence of Christ in the world by helping others to believe in God's love for them, to belong to His church, and to become like Christ in their lives. If you would like to support us in our ministry, you may do so by giving online through our website at fcct.org or by mailing checks to the church. Have a great week.